Yeti.
I love mouses.
How are you? Hope you're fine. This is the Shy Show.
Okay, where you go?
What? I got horns. Oh no.
Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie.
And then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over.
He's ready to record.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep?
Your show is getting so international.
That's right. You said all that Shy is right.
Blimey, Governor. It's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Hello, Paul.
I don't know how it's done.
7, 6, 9.
Say the home with me, say the test,
Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast de Shy Life.
Hello. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm okay. Nick's here.
Hello.
We're going to try and discuss a decade of our life in an hour and a bit or something. So some of it we have covered. So we're going to try and find a new way of doing it and talk about things maybe we haven't talked about. But anyway, it's probably been a long time since we've talked about it. But as you know, we've been doing our 1990 diaries, and those entries and episodes and recordings are still coming out. But as we've been talking about the 90s, we thought we would talk about the whole decade of the 90s and sort of the things that we went through, experienced, etc. So let's run the theme music. When we come back, we'll get chatting.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
My favorite person is me.
Keep it rolling.
Yes, but it's a positive thing. The highlight, the Shy Life.
Go Shy Yeti.
I'll tell you anyway, but it takes
Hello, captain. How are you?
Oh my, I never found out my secret. Vicky Hammett.
I love the NHS. It's my favorite thing.
You can throw that in back. Just listen to this.
Yeah, I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all gooey and meaty. Yum, 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 yum.
I don't think I can speak about it. It's been a while. It's
I'm just being an alien.
I'd like that.
Mother's called.
Taking back snow magic.
Okay, Nick. So I guess 1990. We're going into that in a great deal of detail. So we probably need to cover that the least. But and I don't. There's still bits of 1990 I'm excited to find out about.
Absolutely.
For my own,
Can't find out what happened. Well, we want to find out what happens next.
Yeah, because even you, I mean, your memory's very good, but even you've had a few sort of like, what's that?
Oh, so I used to work with. Yeah.
Or like, it says I did this, but why did I do that? Because
yes, that's right. And I was, when I'm a bit grumpy about sort of people at work.
Yeah, I mean, I swore a few times in my in the entries we've read. And
I don't think I'm not quite sure. I suppose I swore. I think I swore more in the 80s because I was, it's funny, I put the 80s on a pedestal, because there was certain people I met and it was leaving school. This is talking about the latter half of it. And it was leaving school and it was all very exciting. But in actual fact, in my personal development, I needed a lot of work doing. And also, I didn't get a girlfriend in the 80s. I wanted one desperately. And job-wise, you know, I wasn't out of work, but I could have moved on a bit more. And yeah, it's that, possibly because of the music, I tend to put it on a pedestal and the people therein. But in actual fact, it's the 90s I probably owe a great deal more debt to, because it was, you know, we did much more. We were all being creative. All of us were being creative. We did the films, RPS, Sutton Park. You know, it was thriving in terms of personal development. I mean, at the end of the decade, I was still living at home, but you know, there was relationships, and I mean, it really was all I wanted the late 80s to be, really.
I remember the 90s fondly, but also the noughties. Probably out of the two, the noughties were even more exciting. But we could always discuss the noughties another time.
Oh, actually, yeah.
But they were very exciting for different reasons as well. But it was almost like, well, because the 80s was all school for me, so I didn't really have, not that I didn't start having exciting times, but I mean, I think when we've talked about 1990, I've said this feels like the year that I started to get some freedom and go beyond Salisbury. And
well, I don't think you were the only one either, because there was a few things, you know, I did, but I didn't actually venture very far. I was very unadventurous in the 80s. Now I was still going to places largely with my parents. But only when 90 with London, I think I'm not quite sure. I don't think we got quite there yet in the diaries, but I think there's a London trip that you and I went to in 90, and I confessed to you years later it was the first time I'd been to London without any of my parents.
I think having you as a friend put me a bit ahead of, or having like older friends put me a bit ahead of like Robin and Harry, who I was certainly sort of going beyond Salisbury before they did. They probably didn't do that until they went to university.
Sure, yeah.
Although that said, all of the sort of doing these things or going to decide to go to Doctor Who conventions with you, I still don't think I was 100% ready for leaving home for university, because I did still like my home comforts, and it was a bit like being tipped out of the bath, tip the baby out of the bathwater.
I'm not actually. Yes, I mean it's an interesting point, this, because I'm not sure emotionally I was ready to leave home. I think if the circumstances had arisen, I think it would have been a healthy thing to have left home about in the mid-90s. But before then, I'm not 100% sure I was able, you know, could have quite ready, like you say.
Because the thing is, I didn't really want to go into halls of residence when I went to university. I mean, we are jumping ahead a couple of years. I didn't really want to go to halls of residence because I was afraid of the sort of people I'd have to mix with. But I think Harry had quite a nice experience in halls, but it probably would have been a good social thing for me to do. And also, I only really had two big friends at university. One of those dropped off after failing some exams. So I think Harry must have known a lot more people. I didn't really join any societies. I mean, Sutton Park was my society, and if I could drag people into that, but then that wasn't necessarily limited just to university friends.
Previously, I was very timid about joining groups. I joined Smite, the St Martin's Young Communicants, in the 80s, where I met Danny. And although I was in the Doctor Who local group, I was a little bit of an outsider because I didn't have a video recorder yet. And it was only the year that the group finished I actually managed to persuade myself. It was still very... I still lived in a very parent-dominated household. Whereas I think by that time, by the age I was then, my sister had left home and was having babies. So, but the 90s certainly saw a... my social life had taken off anyway by when 90 hit, because I was going to clubs and everything. But I think, once the local group fizzled up, Troby and Warren and yourself and Keith, and they all came round on a Sunday, and it kind of cemented that whole
I was a much later starter with clubs and things, as you will find. It really took until sort of 96 when I met Callum, but I even remember when there was opportunity to go to like the Doctor Who conventions we went to. There were discos, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that. And I remember sort of, not really.
But fast forwarding to the end of the 90s, you and I
couldn't get me off of that.
We couldn't get off it, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
people like Michael Shears and things like that.
I still meet people who are either younger friends or friends who are my age, and they had the same embarrassment about dancing as I did at the start, but I overcame mine partly because Callum's doing it, and we had a good time. So
also in the 90s, you know, when we came into the 90s, I'd already was established friends with yourself and Danny,
yes,
and I no longer had because the 90s obviously was completely school free for me, but I had the wonderful thing where I didn't have a teacher or a contemporary saying to me, you know, you shouldn't be hanging around with younger guys, and you know, there's nothing dodgy about it. But I think because of Smike and because of the local group, which had people younger than me, I didn't think anything of it.
And I was a little bit. To a certain extent, I had Harry and Robin and Danny to a certain extent, but and then I started to get my pen friends who were around my age or a bit older, but generally I was a bit at school. I certainly didn't have much time for people my own age. I was more interested in perhaps maybe meeting people who didn't just want to throw wet bits of soggy paper around in the middle of class to, you know, and silly, stupid sort of pranks that some people play.
Things were coming together as well. I mean, with Studio Theatre, which I joined the year before in '89, it wasn't until '90 I was slowly but surely starting to get parts, and of course in November '90 I had my first proper girlfriend. That sounds a bit pathetic, really, but I suppose being at the school I was, you know, we were deprived of the girls. I didn't know how to talk to girls, and as I say, Elaine and I started seeing each other in '90, and I cannot tell you that meant the world to me. You know, it was having a girlfriend at long last, you know, and you know, I can still remember the magic of that.
I mean, 1990 was the year that I did my GCSEs and then went into sixth form. So even that was, even though I was still at school, there was a certain freedom to that, because I was able to nip off and meet you or spend some time with you on your days off, because it just happened that your day off was the day when I had very little class in the morning.
Yes.
And also even things like sport, which we still had to do, I was able to do cross-country running, but there was no teacher standing there.
No.
I basically walked it, and in the lower sixth, my friend Robin used to walk with me, and we would always be exchanging stories.
Yeah.
By the time we got to the upper sixth the following year, he was always much more diligent student than me, anyway, and he didn't walk with me. But it was the locations we did were all things that turned up in like the chalk pit in Harnham, Old Sarum, Broken Bridges.
Yeah.
Some of these locations I didn't know before, and some of them became like, I didn't know. You know, after you'd done, I'll come back here and do filming, because 1990 was the year that I got my video camera, wasn't it? Is that right?
91 was.
It was 91. Yes, that's right. Yeah. It was because 1990 was my 17th birthday, and I got it for my 18th birthday in 91. So I'd had it a year by the time we started Sutton Park.
But the thing is, I mean, although I don't regret the party I had for my 18th, I think it would have stopped me short if they'd offered me a video camera, which I done. They were far too circumspect with money, my parents, to have countenanced that. But I think really, I should have. Looking back, I should have bought a video camera, because I knew I was interested in filming, and I knew I wanted to make a film or films, and really I should. When I first, what pushed me to hire a camera was when my cousin got married in '89, and we never expected her to get married, and I thought, oh wow, I'm going back to Plymouth, I'm going to see Uncle Leslie and Caroline, and it actually got me to, and of course throughout the 90s from up to 96, I was hiring cameras, and it was, or borrowing them, like from yourself or Elaine, which was stupid. I really should. When I had the money in the bank, I really should have gone out and bought a video camera.
I wonder if
stupid.
I wonder if knowing that you had hired
Yeah.
a video camera probably was what inspired me to hire that one when I made Time Shift in 1990 with Danny in the summer holidays.
I mean, you know, I did that in September. By the October, I was hiring again because I wanted to do do a message. I think a video message to Elaine. I really didn't get the hint. You know that I needed to. You know, it would have paid for itself many times.
They were a lot bigger, those ones you hired as well, compared to the ones that I got in '91.
That's right. You put a whole VHS cassette in it, you know, the kind you put in a video recorder. But with that, I mean, you know, we went on to do stuff. I by '91, when you got your, I cannot believe that I just let that go on and on. We did our first kind of stab at a film together. And obviously you did Time Shift in. But we did the Blake 7 thing.
Yeah, what year was that? 91.
That was 91. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
But you were just about to get your camera, and of course you did the beaches and eventually Sutton Park. But I mean, it would not, even if it had been a hire purchase or something like that. I really should have made it a priority.
And 91 was obviously I was still in sixth form, but because we'd met our friend David and he'd been in Series E, I got an invite to go up around Halloween in 91, and again that was one of the first solo going to Tamworth by train. I remember it being quite sort of, you know, maybe I had to change in Birmingham or what.
Yeah.
I remember, and also being the time of year it was, arriving, it was dark, and a little bit sort of scary that I'd travelled all that way from. And we had a good time, and we made a, I can't remember how many days I was there, but maybe it was like half term or something, and we made a film, and that was sort of probably the other thing that made me want to say when it was I was about to get my video camera, but I didn't have it when I was, because we used David's video camera, but very soon after. Yeah. I had mine.
But I mean, great, and I think you're a trailblazer with the visually, because obviously I didn't get my. Eventually, I saw the light and got my video camera in '98, which was, you know, by which time we'd been making films for 5 or 6 years, but no, I mean, they certainly would have been a better quality than the hired ones, which were tired old machines.
A lot of the early things I filmed, which I don't know, go into too great depth because we've talked about this before, but I was doing the Beach Boys sketches with Harry and Robin and with everyone really, with Elaine, with you, but it was like a sketch show. But also at the same time, because David had the idea of doing the Retaliators, his Avengers spoof, and but it seemed like an idea we knew about from like relatively early in '92, but it wasn't going to be filmed into the summer. And to keep my excitement, that I did my own Retaliators film and little short films.
And of course, that naturally, once we'd done that, I thought I really, really want to do something. And of course, we wrote Prison in the Sun in '93, and of course, the films went on well into the noughties, and your own film projects as well.
Also, in the summer of '92, my friend Patrick, who was my American pen friend, he came over for 2 weeks in the summer, and so I had an idea that we'd do a film with him, and that was ended up being another spin-off of Retaliators with the character I played, Chad Brightly, who was a journalist, and Patrick played a sort of alien character, and basically we just filmed it. It was very much in the way that, particularly with that, I think maybe with everything I did around then, it was ad-libbed, but the film I did with Patrick, we went to Oxford, we went to Exeter, I saw all sorts of friends those 2 weeks, and everyone was dragged in very much as they would be for Sutton Park. Later in the year and for the next 8 years. But
no, and again, that was your encouragement on that, persuaded me to carry on writing stuff, and it with that developed nicely. We both developed our own kind of either one-off or serialised. So it was the decade of very much of videoing, and decade of social. Lots of friends during that time.
There was no Doctor Who, so we we did do the Blake Seven film, but we preferred to do our own projects.
I think actually, people talk about the wilderness years. I don't. If I'm honest, I don't actually resent there being no Doctor Who apart from the TV movie. At all, because as you say, we sort of moved away from that, and started doing. I was still doing writing Life After at the time, and noticeably that series, rather than Magnet Editor, especially the early years, moved away from being Who inspired. I know with Joe Bunsell, he some of his stories more sort of science fiction book inspired. But I'm looking back. I really didn't feel we were missing out with the '90s, because in many ways, Who didn't dominate our life quite as much as it had before.
I didn't do so much writing in the '90s. I started. And I'm always finding things in boxes where I've started something. Some of my more successful, as far as completing them, things were like Roman Quavel and Travellers, and I keep going on about and another series in those 1990 diaries. I'm not even sure I have a copy of anymore. But when I started at university, I was having to write essays all the time, so it made you want to write less. I did sort of towards the end of sixth form, that's when I started getting into the poetry, but that was mainly because we were taught, we studied such quite difficult poetry. Sylvia Plath, who's quite she was relatively modern at the time. She was only dead about 20 years by the time we did her, 25 years maybe. But she was very abstract, and it was quite difficult to understand. We hadn't done that much poetry, so for that to be the main poet we did in the whole of school, it was rather a strange choice, I think.
By contrast, I probably wrote more. I was kind of before then, for the 90s, I was... my writing scripts and things were very stumbly, kind of. It took ages to get anything written, and I didn't have a discipline. I didn't really enjoy it as much as I knew I wanted to do it, but I kind of didn't feel so free flowing. So these scripts of the films enabled me to actually fine tune that, that was that.
Whereas improvisation, that's what. Well, I mean, I don't quite know where the improvisation came from. If anything, I'd say it came from school assemblies, because you never had time to write scripts for school assemblies. And I got to the stage where I was always the one who was expected to, because they used to rotate, I think. I don't know how many form groups there were, but when it came to my class, everyone knew I would take charge with my little gang. And a lot of what we did was what I'd say would be learned improvisation, or where you improvised what we were going to do, and then kept repeating it and rehearsing it.
Yeah.
So you kind of you stuck roughly to what you. And I guess I mean we never did that with Sutton Park. We didn't really rehearse things. We just did them, but very occasionally we might have had to retake something. But
that was the other thing that was exciting about the sort of mid to latter end is I did have 2 pieces. I did actually have 2 written pieces to put on. That's the Cradle Snatcher, which you came to see, and the Dominoes, which was at Alderbury. So that was exciting. That was an exciting time because you really felt I did
write later on in the 90s. I wrote Cross to Bear and Touchwood, but by then I was out of university.
Yeah.
So I don't think I wanted to write that much whilst I was having to study. Although when my video camera broke down in early '93, I tried to write Sutton Park related poems. I really wanted to be doing something with Sutton Park, as it was a new thing and I was just getting into it. But my video camera packed up. Yeah, those first couple of terms at university were a bit of a roller coaster for me. But
look at work-wise, I obviously Four Boys carried on from '86 onwards into the '90s to '96, and it was. I think it was seeing Michelle, our friend Michelle, in a Shakespeare show that she did at the Out of Pocket Theatre. I was thinking, well, there's somebody a little bit older than me, and she's actually following her way at college. And I thought I'd always resisted the idea of going back to college because I thought, no, I want to work. But I think it finally persuaded me that actually, what have I got to lose?
I think seeing Michelle also, although it took another couple of years because I wasn't actually really writing many poems by the time I saw Michelle. But it did make me think, just a minute, she's doing rhyming poetry, humorous poetry. Hers might have been a bit more edgy because she had more life experience. But otherwise, in a way, they weren't a million miles away. And I kind of thought, well, she can do rhyming poetry, because I always got the feeling that people who weren't super into poetry liked rhyming poetry, because people are used to song lyrics, which often rhyme. But it wasn't necessarily popular with other poets, or certainly I felt that later on. It was other poets that queried using rhyme, not the audience. And if you're writing a silly poem, often the rhyme helps it. You have to do it properly, but you have to spend time on it. You can't just put the first line that comes out. But I think seeing Michelle made me think, I ought to find a way of doing something with those poems. Although looking back, what I'd written in the early 90s, there's only 1 or 2 that I would still perform to this day. That it's one of those things where I improved. The more I did, the more I improved.
I think that's the same for everyone, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the other, apart from all the certain parts of the films and everything, the standout thing for me was I was actually, it sounds very juvenile, but because I was actually having relationships. And after Elaine, there was Tina, and the whole thing of going to Bristol, and I think I always say Bristol, courting in Bristol, and the sort of having a really grown-up relationship probably taught me more about life than school ever did, because I was meeting real people. I was meeting people in a much more deprived area, and it was an eye-opener as well as a sort of heart-warmer, because of course it was these nice, and whirlwind romance in theatre with Jill, and a bit of and Kath, and all of whom appeared on Sutton Park, and of course my first proper taste of grief when Jill died.
Whereas probably the reason I said the noughties were more exciting was I did have some things going on in the 90s, but they didn't necessarily work out, and the one that didn't work out at university kind of put me off. And because there was so exciting things happening, because I wasn't really talking about it with very few people, also I started going to gigs. There was the Britpop. I was very much into Britpop, and there were lots of sort of bands to go to, and it was almost there wasn't time. It was easy to not think about that, and also it wasn't very easy to meet people in those days, like it became in the noughties. You would have to go and stand in a bar maybe, or you'd have to meet somebody at work, or maybe there'd be use a dating agency or something. But I sort of avoided that for most of the 90s. But I don't regret that, because that, although it was fun, it became fun to be out and about more, or having partners in the noughties. There's also sort of good bad sides of that. So in a way, I'm certainly glad that I had that time free to sort of focus on my creative side and doing. It certainly was a social time.
For all of us, I think.
University, and eventually sort of found my small crowd and had people I could record with.
We were your crowd.
Kerry and Phil, that was it.
Well, I mean, when pre-uni, with Troby and Least, Troby and everybody coming around my house, and that was the sort of first. I feel that was the first proper gang I'd been a legitimate part of. Smike, I was a member of, but I never, it always felt that there was a sort of hierarchy with Smike, even though I've got great affectionate memories of it, and that whole sort of Sunday afternoon tradition with Troby, and of course we were expanding our video collections. Obviously with Doctor Who, as you quite rightly say, we were going to Doctor Who conventions, and
I think having that social life, I felt that sort of changed the hierarchy or the dynamic with Harry and Robin, because I think intelligence-wise I was probably the lower of the three. I mean, Robin went to Oxford, Harry was very good at maths, I was good at English, and that was it really. But I think once I started having friends and beyond school, and even leaving Salisbury, often I was the one who'd say to them, "Oh, we should do this, or we should take the bus to Bournemouth, or we should take the..." I know Harry certainly credits me with introducing him to more modern music in a way that he hadn't really. I mean, he loved Shakespeare's Sister, who was starting to have hits in the very late 80s and early 90s, but it was me doing him tapes of music, because I'd already moved through my ABBA and Beatles phase into buying contemporary music by then. And
I mean, music is an odd one, because obviously I was aware of what was in the charts in the earlier 90s because I was selling it, but you know, the record department at Four Boys. Now, because I was much more into the music in the 80s. By the 90s, I think what was there wasn't interesting me as much. I think obviously, I to a degree, I mean, you know, not completely, but to a degree, I let it all flow over me. But ironically, it was when I left Four Boys that I became more interested in music again, because I went back to college and studied radio journalism. And one of the things that Dr. Kirkaldy, our tutor, said, you know, "Oh, you've got to get interested in valve, interested in this, interested in that." And he you know, and that was exactly the time when the Spice Girls started. And when I think of the Spice Girls, I always think of 96, 97, 98, when I was at college. So I always think of my college day very fondly. You know, that was another. You know, it had its problems, but it was a bit of a golden era for me, because
I remember in '93, that was like the first year, at the end of my first year of university. It seemed like one of those summers that just stretches on and on. Because I wasn't expected to work by my parents, but in summer '93, I think we finished quite early. I think I guess they have to stagger all the exams at university, and maybe first year or second year exams. And then they have to focus on the people who are actually graduating that year. And I don't know, but I feel like we finished late May, so I probably had between May and late September to do whatever I liked. And in that time, I did a massive long hike with my friend Andrew Reid, who's been on the show, and that was a first. That was the first and last time I've ever hiked for like days with a tent, and of course I took my video camera.
And that's one time, but I wish I'd brought the invention of the internet or the text or whatever forward to a more manageable time, because I couldn't actually. We were in the midst of scripting Prison in the Sun, which was sort of being made the following. I couldn't get hold of you. Yeah. I had a snag and I couldn't get hold.
I think it took longer to do it than I expected. It was so hot, and I think I just about got back in time to get down to London for Elaine's birthday. But I think at the time I thought I was going to have more time beforehand. I almost got that the day before or something.
But we, Prison in the Sun, that was a first, because you know it was the first time I'd actually had a film that I'd written, because Elaine and I couldn't agree who was going to write Series E, so it was improvised in the end, but or sort of it was vaguely planned, and then. With that, I mean, you know, that's although I wasn't really planning to do another one after that. You know, we did, and it set the wheels in motion.
That summer I also had I don't know if it was 2 weeks or 1 week, but I had a holiday with my parents. I was never against going on holiday with my parents, because they had access to interesting places, and also once I started doing Sutton Park, it was like, I get to go on location, and it's like being in a real film. And of course it wasn't, but it felt I was able to sort of, you know, I remember quite a few holidays I had in the 90s, which ended up on Sutton Park, going to Paris and having the puppet characters act in it all felt going to Lanzarote, where they'd done Doctor Who a few years before. It all felt like I in my little head, it was like sort of, you know, if this was a real TV show, we're filming in Lanzarote, we're filming in Paris. How wonderful!
Family-wise, although obviously I only really saw my parents I didn't really socialise with my parents anymore, but because we had our last holiday together in '86. But with that, my godson was born in '90, and that I kind of used that to reopen relationships with Plymouth, with the wedding and everything like. Because I'd always loved Plymouth back in the 70s when my grandparents were alive.
And I went there with you in '95.
And that was a lovely holiday because I was able to share with you a house that I'd known in the 70s, you know, and I suppose late 60s as well. When we went, we were basically it was the same place, but my grandparents lived around the corner, and my grandparents' house is on Sutton Park as well.
Making sure it's still recording.
I was able to share all that with you, but the sort of the need to be a godfather actually helped because I was able to see a lot more of my cousin and of Plymouth, which has now sadly, because she's not very well, and Ian's got married and has got his own life now, so it's kind of needing another renaissance, to be honest.
I mean, I still used to go and visit my great auntie in Reading when I was at university, so I got her on Sutton Park, and I'm very glad I did that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was nice and close, really. It's not that long between Birmingham and Reading. Also, Robin was in Oxford, so sometimes I go and see her and him, and or see everybody. That was quite handy. It wasn't that difficult to get into London. It was a strange course though, because there was a work placement. So I had all of the first year, and then the first 2 terms of the second year, but by then I was living with Kerry, because at the end of the first year, around Easter, after about 2 terms of the first year, I had to leave because I lived with a family, but they had a death in the family and they needed to move the remaining partner to the house, so I had to move out, and I ended up living with Kerry, but then he was told, we won't be taking students next year, so then we had to rush at the end of the first year to find somewhere for the second year. But of course there was the additional problem where we had to say, well, we're only going to be here for 2 of the terms, and actually that worked out for the landlord. And also when we finished the placement, he had the room still free, and we went back, and then even when I left university, I ended up having a job placement in Birmingham, and my room was still free, so that was a really nice house to live in, because it was very, very close to Spaghetti Junction, but with a lovely lake just opposite, over the road.
Going back to Plymouth, there was that obviously my cousin's wedding the previous year had inspired me to film, but I actually hired a camera again when we went back for Ian's christening, and I thought, if we're going to see Uncle Leslie and everything, I'd really like that on video. And although it wasn't a great video I did, it was the last time I ever saw Uncle Leslie, which in '91, which was I treasure that video now. And also it was the last time I went on holiday with my parents, I went away with my parents, and I got a whole lot of videoing of their banter, and it was quite nice, because my dad was in a dark place in the '80s, because it was after his second breakdown he became very argumentative and harassable, whereas by 91 in the 90s he calmed right down after Mum retired, and so where you see them on that video is quite they're in a better place than they were, and of course I was able to get some Plymouth on video, but
I remember being very cross at the end of my first year. I had my exams, and my parents went to Florence with my brother, and I think that's another thing, having a younger brother. They were still doing holidays with him, and I didn't want to miss out on those as well, so I also, Auntie was involved, and if I could go on a holiday, if Auntie was going on a holiday, I wanted to be there too, because so it did make a difference to sort of I remember one of the holidays, I can't remember what year this was now, but probably quite early 90s, we went to Mallorca, and we had 2 villas, because the big villas weren't big enough to have all of us. So Auntie and I shared a villa, and Graham and my mum and dad another villa. So for a brief time we were like roomies. I mean, it was, and obviously I had Graham. I rope into Sutton Park, so I had someone to sort of you know, when we went to Jersey that time in '93, I got to have him washed off the rocks, and I got hypnotised and tried to drown him in a swimming pool, as you do. I mean, I'd probably have done that anyway when I was filming or not. Unfortunately, my plans didn't work, Danny. Sorry, Elena, I didn't mean that. Yeah, the good thing about '94 for me was once university was over and I was doing the placement, my placement ended up being relative to sort of local to Salisbury. So then for 9 months I was back at my parents', which initially I was a bit like, I thought I'd gone to university. Having not really been sure about going to university, I then I'm kind of used to it now, and now I'm having to come home. But actually, the money they paid you, I don't know how I'd have managed otherwise. Yeah. And also, I got to see you on a regular basis.
Yeah, that was nice.
I also, every time that, say, Harry or Robin came home, or during summer or during holidays, I'd see them. You know, we got to do a lot of pubs in Salisbury. So that was good. It would have been horrible if I'd have been having to start again in the middle of nowhere.
I remember. I think it was about '94. We used to go out regularly to the Stag and play pool games of pool. I played a lot of pool in the '90s. Yeah. I think there was Robin and Harry were with us at one point, and you were there with your video camera doing a lights shoot, and Robin thought a car was coming because you had the light on, and you used to have a Pernod and blackcurrant.
Well, that was Phil had Pernod and blackcurrant, but I think I used to have Pernod and blackcurrant, well, because Phil had it, and who knows, maybe the others copied me because they. I don't think any of us were particularly experienced with drinking, so we were a bit all over the place.
I didn't really.
It was quite nice.
I didn't. I mean, I liked wine, but I really didn't know how to drink it. I mean, I was laughing stock with the way I used to make it last. In a completely unway, I mean, it would every time a video of something I really liked came out on video, I would bring out the same bottle of wine, and it was basically vinegar by the end. I wouldn't dream of doing that these days because, of course, I got a lot more into wine towards the end of the '90s when
I used to drink cider, but that's mainly because when I started drinking, that's what Kerry drank, so I drank cider, and then when I met Callum, I sort of drank lager.
If in doubt, I'd go for a lager shandy.
I should have done the lager shandy thing because I kind of hated.
Which is the first one. When my sister took me into the dust hole to have my first legal alcoholic drink, I said, "Well, what about us for it? Because I'll try a lager shandy." And it's still the first thing that Obviously, I default to wine now, but for a long time it was my go-to.
I thought that drinking cider didn't seem to be what everyone else was drinking when I met Callum and his friends. So I had lager to be like them, but I really hated lager, normal lager.
Yeah, I'm not keen.
Particularly, sorry, Stella. Stella's not going to sponsor us, but I thought Stella was absolutely appalling. It was always like you're having to gulp it down. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's mainly because I had been drinking such sweet ciders.
And it tastes. Yeah, that's one. I think it leaves a very nasty aftertaste. Radio Oddstock, I did a spate as a DJ, and also, of course, another slight hangover from the 80s was Ray-Face Shift, my Doctor Who Tape magazine, which was, we used to was one part of that Sunday afternoons where with Toby and Keith, and we would always record a bit. That went on until '96.
We still did our yearly visits to Longreach for the 90s.
Yes, we filmed. 90 was the year we've actually filmed it. Again, hired a camera, and did that first one. And I think did I hire it the second? Yes, I did hire it. And so we did about 3 years worth of Longleat's videos.
And Longleat appeared in that film, I maybe with Patrick as well, because again, that was another place we took him to.
Yeah.
Running around the maze with those tentacle things.
Yes. The Doctor Who, funnily enough, the Doctor Who exhibition actually ceased to be around about the time the show came back, which I thought was lousy timing on the part of Lord Barr. But it's never returned, which surprises me. I think there is a huge nostalgia potential for Who to still be at Longleat, because it's still it's the special convention from 40 years ago, which I went to. I mean, that's still etched on people's minds. They still talk about it today.
But when I finished university in '95, I had another one of those glorious summers. I had to sign on for the unemployment benefit, but because I got a degree in an actual vocational. Originally, when I went to university, I wanted to do media studies, because that sounded I would do TV.
Yeah.
But media studies was like the in subject, the newest subject. And whereas now, I think it'd be very easy to get on a media studies course. Back then, you had to get 3 A's at A level, and I wasn't going to do that.
Because I was doing that at college.
Yeah.
Well, that was two things. That was radio journalism, and I think the media was part of that, but it was locked into that.
But that was sort of the opposite end of the 90s from when I was looking to do it, when it was new and it was difficult to get on the course.
Yeah.
So I decided to do library information studies, because libraries ran in our family with my mum and my aunt and uncle. But so anyway, because I'd done a vocational degree, they didn't bother me too much for I just had to do, as long as I'd done a certain amount of CVs or application forms, they left me alone. And it was quite a lovely summer, I think, '95. And
it was.
Yeah.
We made 3 films that year.
Yeah.
Three films that summer. I mean, it was roller coaster. I mean, I don't know how I drew breath, because I did 4 shows as well. 4 shows and about.
I used to meet for lunch.
Films,
I used to meet for lunch on the day I had to sign in. So I had to sign on soon after lunch. So I meet you, and then I just potter my way back across the fields back to Charlton Bridges and do Sutton Park. And so even when I was unemployed, that year we had a nice holiday to Yorkshire with Auntie. That's the year I went to Lanzarote.
You went to Plymouth with me.
Yes, and I literally remember being offered a job, and it was a case of sort of saying, "Oh, I'll have to start a week the following week because I'm going to Lanzarote." So I just literally went on holiday, then went back to Birmingham and picked up filming Sutton Park back in Birmingham for another 6 months.
It's the travel I remember as well. I mean, I went on a date. It was crazy days, and I wouldn't dream of it. I went on a pretty well a blind date. Between relationships, I was on Dateline magazine, and I went for a date in Sheffield. Cost me a bomb together, but I made a good. It didn't work out, but I made a very good friend of Tracy, who we had a date with. And so we were travelling all over the place, staying over with friends, and very exciting.
It was weird living back up in Birmingham again, because there was no longer my friends. I mean, some of them were still in Birmingham, but I remember ringing one of them up and saying, "Well, I'm back in Birmingham." He wasn't like a really close friend, but he was on the course, and I always felt like he resented that I could come up to Birmingham and stolen the jobs from Birmingham people, sort of thing. I don't know whether he might even have applied for the same job.
Yeah.
And I sort of, Kerry and I weren't getting on. So it was weird. During the week, I kind of lived a sort of, going to work, coming back and filming in my bedroom, and then at weekends I'd always go away from Birmingham or invite somebody up to Birmingham. I was really glad that I was at least in the house that I knew still, because that was like the friendly face. At least having the landlord who was a bit of a funny guy, but he was nice enough, and at least it was a familiar face who I'd known, and that job sort of crossed over into 96. And then one of the times that you came up in 96, you were supposed to be coming up for the week or for quite a lot of the week. I was aware that it was a 6-month placement and I was running out, and I'd end up being back unemployed again. So I was applying for jobs, and I had a job interview back down south, and I was kind of like, oh, but Nick's coming up that week, and it's only for 6 months or something, this other job. And my mum said, well, you ought to go for it. So I think I said to you, well, you can still come up, but then we're going to have to go back. You can still hang out. And you actually came to Camberley with me and wandered around Camberley whilst I was home my interview.
Yes, I remember that.
And we nearly lost you because we were supposed to be meeting you at a certain point, and we couldn't see you, and then we saw you going in the opposite direction, and my mum was like,
yes, it was, I had. The other thing was there's so much that was part of our 90s with college. Going back to college actually was the beginning really for me, because I was starting to drift away from retail, and of course at the very end of the 90s I got the hospital job and I'm still there. But yes, with Camberley it was also the decade of night. I was still night clubbing. We were night clubbing together because I'd night clubbed.
Well, yeah.
I'd started clubbing in the late 80s, and we by about the mid 90s we were clubbing together.
When I started working at the library, I met Callum. He worked for IT, so he used to come to us quite a lot. He was also friends with Sarah and Joe who worked at the library. And then I sort of became friends with him and got invited to go to the quiz nights, and then we started going horse racing. I mean, I even went to football matches with him. It was partly because I didn't have any friends really, or I knew I needed. There were people in the house where I lived, but I could tell they were a bit more, they were sort of quite businessy, and also they were probably just going to be there for a few months before they moved on.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it's difficult. I did hang out with them initially, but then it was difficult to kind of balance friends, and I kind of thought, well, Callum's definitely more my type of person, even though he's sporty. He does like music, and he's more my age, and he's based in Camberley because his parents live there, and I'm kind of gonna have to, if I'm gonna have to make a decision, I'll make a decision for Callum's friends who had all adopted me, and he'd gone to college quite close to his home, so a lot of his friends were still there, and I was almost like an honorary member of their college, and I got to I made friends with people who were even beyond the close group of friends, and got invited to weddings of people, all to do with the college, much more than I did for my own university. I never got, But you were saying about night clubbing. I started going night clubbing with Callum, which then meant I was up for night clubbing in other circumstances. Yeah. And you came to Camberley. We went night clubbing at
there was
other places.
New Years. Your 2 New Years in Camberley. We went clubbing.
And then if we went to Doctor Who conventions, I'd go there. But also, I'd started going to music gigs in '95 with Kerry. We saw people like Supergrass and Elastica and various Britpop bands that were not the top bands, but they were still getting top 40 hits, and later became maybe even bigger. So I started going to gigs in '95. Then I went to see Pulp. That's the last big gig I went to with Kerry before we kind of had a little falling out for 5 years. But then I met somebody. There was a guy who was living in Kerry's room when I came back in '95 to '96, and we kept saying, "Oh, we must go for a drink." And then one day he said, his name's Darren, and he knocked on my door and said, "I'm actually moving out next week. If we're going to do that drink, we better do it." So I said, "Yes, okay." I think I was a little bit down. I wasn't sure I wanted to go and have a drink with someone I didn't really know, but actually I did, and it was really good, and we got on really well. And then even when he moved out, we used to meet once a week, and we started doing pub crawls in Birmingham, and I went again years later. I went to his wedding, and actually when I graduated in this because our graduation was almost a year after we finished our course.
Yeah.
Certainly 9 months. It was in the spring of '96, and I wasn't up on the knowledge as to whether we were going to be having a course party. I don't know if there was a course party. I didn't hear about it if there was. No internet, no phones at those times. So actually it happened that Darren was having a housewarming there. So the nearest I had to a university party was to go to Darren's housewarming, which was perfect, fine. That's the time I got offered a joint, and I was so nervous about it that I went, oh, no. And then the next person next to me went, oh, no. And I felt really cool because I'd been the first person it was offered to.
Just say no.
And I'm going to look like a little square, but I don't even know how to smoke. That would be worse. I don't want to be... It'd be even worse if I start coughing.
But, no, we've... Actually, I became good friends with Michelle from '95 onwards, and she was a big part of my social life from then to
she came on Sutton Park.
Yeah, she did. She did. We improvised quite late at night. She used to do stuff when we were filming Run Fast in the World. I think we were there till the early. Well, I was quite often during that time. I was quite often there till the early hours.
She seemed to get what I was doing, even though she wasn't part of the group who kind of knew what a weirdo I am. She kind of seemed to get what I was doing with the puppets by then.
Yeah.
I'd found all these puppets in a pound shop and was using them as extra characters. That's how Cromitty came about. And she seemed to get that. And she used to interact really well with Little J and things like that. So she was a good.
She was a good all-round person to have on board. I mean, it was because of her that I got my first stage, put on. That was the other thing with 90s. I got loads of, I did loads of stage stuff, both starting in Alderbury, a studio theatre, but also a lot with Alderbury, with the shows there and Happy Stage of Your Life, and I started progressing into parts because I started to go to London more, socialising more, relationship, blah blah blah. 99 was a big breakout year for me because of course I left retail for good and started office work, and which led to me meeting my wife and leaving home and in the early noughties. So
you even worked with when you were at college with my friend Sarah,
yes,
which added another
just
sort of
after college,
added that weird triangle of like you knew Harry knew Sarah.
Harry I'd known all his life. We'd have been at the beaches in the 70s together. But with Sarah, that was weird because I'd heard about her. I knew of her, and I was literally the summer I left college. I was working at Index, the catalogue shop, which she was working at, and I don't know quite. I think maybe you came in, or maybe somebody. I would have talking about it, and we made a connection. And I used to walk her home because she lived in Arnhem at the time, and we used to walk on home together across the town park.
That was probably the most. I don't quite know whether she ever worked in bars at university or anything, but that was probably the last time she worked before she jumped up into being like a big city estate agent and working really highfalutin jobs.
A lot of people who were either come from or went on to did Index as a sort of jumping off point because effectively it was only a Saturday job for me because I was a security. During my college years in the 90s, I was also a security guard at the college and the DHSS building. And ironically, there was only a fraction of the work to do in the DHSS building, but it paid more because it was more dangerous. But no, with Index, they were a jolly lot actually. But there was a journalist at the who I think I spoke to or worked with or something like that, who I'd worked with the year before on work experience, and she joined the team of at Index for a bit. I can't remember, Katie or whatever her name was.
So I've been going to gigs with Kerry, and then I went to gigs with Darren for, we went to a few gigs whilst I was still in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Canham, we started going to gigs. I remember there being a guy in the house who had a car, and he fancied the singer of a band and said, and I think I must have mentioned that I wanted to see them because I like the group. And he said, well, I'll take you there, because he fancied the singer. And then I started going to gigs with Canham, and sometimes we stayed at Auntie's afterwards. We went to see Radiohead in 1997 and stayed with Canham's sister, because she was married when I first met Canham, and they lived in London. And so Canham is definitely the right choice to make as far as a friend, because he's still my friend to this very day. So.
Yeah.
But one of the most exciting things, in a way, that happened in very late '96 was that another strange character moved into the house I was living in Camberley, this big old manor house that was a bit dilapidated.
I remember that.
And it turned out there was a gent named George who had moved onto my floor. The trouble was mixing these groups. I was really into sort of hanging out with Canham and his friends, and it was difficult to. And I kind of thought, well, I would like to be friends with George, but where does he fit? You only have so much time for socialising. Yeah. I don't think he really fits into the Canham group, but he's much more like my sci-fi friends. So also he started doing Sutton Park with me, and he gave me a lot to work with, because he played a very mysterious character. One of the other great things about improvising is if you work with somebody who really takes it over and plays a character, and you want to know as much as an actor what he's going to do next. And so George and I became good friends, and he got on pretty well with our group, particularly with sort of Lisa and Troby and stuff, and you, and then eventually I had to move out of that place in '98 because, well, I rented a room in that place via an agency who turned out to have been swindling the actual owner of the house and not giving them the full share. And then also some of the tenants were taking advantage of that and not paying their rent, whereas I always paid my rent. I wasn't thrown out like some of the people, but it seemed like the right time to move on. And Callum was up for moving in with me, so we got our place in Woking, where we lived for the next couple of years, and that was a really nice sort of maisonette. It never seemed to get dusty. There were so many windows. I think I just thought that if you open the windows, the dust just blew straight through. I think it was a good location for filming in, and it had a garage, so I could use that as an extra location.
Mention of Woking, I remember Sniff, your cat.
Yeah.
Now,
well,
the only pet I had and have since was Junior, my cat. He was born in '82. We got him in '82, but I think he eventually died in '96 from kidney failure. But he was a good old mog, and my dad had already struck up a bond with him because he was. He helped him through his breakdown, basically.
Sniff was sort of the proto-Dealey. He wasn't mine, but he came to visit, yeah. and his sister as well. It took me a few more years to get my own cat because we didn't leave that house until early 2000, so we won't be discussing that move. But it took a while, even then, for me to make friends with somebody who offered me a kitten, as it were. That sounds like, would you like to see my kittens? But
will you be my friend? Do you have kittens? I'm afraid not, then.
The good thing about that house I had in Camberley was that I was up in the roof, but I had a main living area, but then I had an inner sanctum where my bedroom was. Yeah. But it meant that if somebody was coming to stay, I had a spare bedroom. That's right. At the other end of in the main area of the room.
But whereas I was still at home, and everybody who stayed over was in my room.
It was a bit of a squash back in Birmingham. Where I know you came and stayed, but it was a little bit of a squash. But luckily, you were a thin gentleman, and you were even skinnier back then. So you fitted in the gap quite well. I don't think I stood on you when I got up in the middle of the night to use the loo or anything. So there wasn't much space. I liked that room I had in Birmingham because it couldn't get messy, or things had to stay on the shelves because you only had a certain amount of floor rooms to move about. So there was certainly a lot of stuff in that room, but it wasn't all over the floor because there was no way you could cope with that. I had more space to spread out in both Camberley and Woking.
Yeah. But I mean, you would stay over, I think.
Yes.
Andy stayed over a bit when he was doing films, and Lane, of course, stayed over several times. Lisa did. Georgina, my friend from Northern Ireland, stayed over a lot in '99.
But by '99, Harry and I were beginning to get curious, and I had been out and about with him because by then he went to university in Exeter, but then he became a tutor in Oxford and then later an accountant in Oxford. So I used to socialise a lot with him.
I didn't realise he'd been a tutor.
Well, he was going to be a maths teacher, so he went to Oxford to do a teacher training course, but found it quite intimidating. I didn't realise he didn't want to work with a whole crowd of kids, but he was a good teacher and could do one-to-one, so he tutored for quite a while. And I knew he was a good teacher because he'd helped me pass my A-levels when I was struggling with one of my subjects, so he was very good at so I can well believe he was a good tutor, but he ended up using maths for accountancy instead. But we used to socialise in Oxford and going to pubs and clubs. Then we started beginning to explore. He wasn't that long for Oxford by the end of the 90s. He moved up to London, I think, around 2000. But
that's right, because we stayed over with him when we went to Las Vegas.
Yes, but we started going to clubs and pubs, exploring. We went up one weekend and we tried all these different pubs on Old Compton Street and stuff, and tried to find out which one was our sort of.
Yeah.
Because again, there wasn't necessarily, you couldn't sort of type into. I mean, some of these things were coming along, but I certainly didn't have a computer in my house back then. So we began to explore.
I just about got. I got a mobile phone in '99, and that was more. I think I was encouraged with more with that. When I started communicating a lot with Georgina, that's what got me into texting because we were able to send messages to each other. But it was definitely '99. I've still got the same number.
I can't quite remember when I got my first mobile phone, but I mean, Harry arranged a blind date for me in '99, which kind of started off things, which leads into the noughties. But we are running out of time, though, I'm afraid.
Yes.
So
we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But in short, I think the '90s was a very, very important decade for both of us. It was a sociable, productive, creative. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
It had its peaks and troughs. And the other, you very quickly. Good heavens. Very quickly, the other thing was although I was part of Studio in Alderbury, I also was I joined briefly in '94. I joined the 18 to 30 group, which wasn't really my cup of tea. I mean, I gave it a whirl, but they were very kind of sporty, quizzy kind of. There was a guy, ironically called Nick, who was a bit of a geeky guy who was running these things, and they were always sneering about his efforts to do social things. And I thought, this isn't actually very nice. And in the end, I left because I think I did Alderbury and said, do you want to come along and do a play? And after I'd done the play, I realised, well, that's the only group I really need. That's the only social group I need because I saw the light.
Yeah. Anyway, well,
thank you, '90s.
Yes, thank you, '90s. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed our bottled 90s, or at least the highlights of our 90s. Don't worry, you'll be able to hear the minutiae of 1990 which, as we continue. That's going to take us the next 2 or 3 years to get through 1990, I think. But we don't. Well, Nick has diary entries for all those years, but I don't. So
that would be rather.
But anyway, you're probably glad that there's only going to be one Yeti year as quite as detailed as 1990 is. But anyway. Well, thanks again, Nick. Maybe we'll talk about the noughties another time.
That would be nice.
And join us again soon, listeners. There'll be plenty of episodes in the can, and we'll say goodbye for now. All right, bye-bye for now. Goodbye. Back to things that I kind of forgot along the way. 95, when I was unemployed, I started a film studies course at the college, and I remember that's when I saw Casablanca, and I saw 1 or 2 sort of famous films which I probably would never have automatically gone to, and I did my first couple of essays and was getting good marks, but then I got that job up in Birmingham again and had to end the course, but I was quite enjoying that course. I would have enjoyed continuing it. I mean, I could have done something similar somewhere else probably, but I had the time for it. When I finished that job in 96, I knew I had that Camberley job by then, but there's always security clearance, and that took about 4 months, 2 of the months when I was still working, and then I had to go unemployed for 2 months in sort of May, June time, 96. Around the time that the 1996 Doctor Who movie came out. And again, so good weather. My dad was working for himself. He was sort of being a relocation agent for people who wanted to move into an area, but they needed somebody to do the legwork for them. So most days he was driving off into the country, because he used to deal with quite nice big houses. So he'd drive me off into, like, down to Winchester and drop me off in Winchester, go off and do work, and I'd go off and do Sutton Park. So again, the unemployment people didn't bother me, because they'd seen the letter saying you'd been offered the job, we're just doing clearance. So I had to keep pretending. I had to still apply for things even though I had a job. There was some misunderstanding at my previous job, because I wasn't able to tell them when I was starting. I think when I left, they thought, oh, poor Paul, he's not... They were a bit low-key when I left, because I think they thought that I hadn't got a job I didn't want to say. And I bumped into one of the people from that job later that year at some sort of business sort of forum type thing, and he said, oh, did you get a job eventually? And I had a job. I did have a job, but because the job I'd been in wasn't civil service, I don't think they understood about security clearance and how long it can take. And I already knew how that worked from having done my placement at a government facility. So, yeah, I do remember feeling a bit sort of like, I knew I was okay. I knew the job was... It was funny, the twice I've been unemployed... Well, I'm not employed now, but that's different. But I'm retired these days. But the twice I was unemployed in the 90s was very nice weather. I was okay because I was staying at my parents'. I had a little bit of money coming in each week, and I would give some to my mum for rent, but then I'd have enough money to buy camcorder tapes or to go to the pub and play pool or whatever.
I must admit, when I went back to college, I wrote to the council. They gave me a pathetic grant. It was less than £200, and but my parents were so up for me going back to college. They basically waived my rent for 2 years, which was brilliant. I for some reason I was still skinned. I was kind of, I paid things like the phone bill. Yeah, I mean I thought to myself, well, I don't really. It all added up. I had, as I say, I had the 2 jobs. So I was only, I came out of 4 Boys. I was into Index within a month. But it was, and I stayed on after I left college. I stayed on at Index doing extra hours until Christmas, and from summer to Christmas, and then they sort of turned around and said, we've overspent. We can't continue. You've got to go back to Saturday, and that was the kick in the rear end that I needed to go to actually start really seriously looking for work. And as I say, by February I was working at the hospital, which was great.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear, what's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Let's go.
I have a voice.
I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice.
We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
That is so cringe, oh my god. You're a man of culture as well.
Testing. Right. I'll put it there so you hopefully it'll balance on that. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life podcast with me, Paul the Show. Yeah.
Didn't expect that.
What the hell just happened on the show? I mean, seriously, reverse it, because I lost. What's going on? What happened?
Man, was that worth it or not? Oh my goodness, that was a darling little shoe. Wow, I love that one. Great show, Paul.
769. 现在是世界人民。
That is beautifully done. I'm going to have some orange squash now. So exciting.
Oi, that's your lot.
Bye. So everyone's a critic.
You can always call me.
Et voilà.
Take care.
Okay, stopping recording now.